Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new edition of Policy Watch. I'm Kriti Mishra. Today we'll take a closer look at the National Policy on Software Products 2019. This policy has been approved to develop India as a software product nation. The policy will lead to the formulation of several schemes, initiatives, projects and measures for the development of software products sector. Initially, there's an outlay of 1,500 crore rupees to implement the programs and schemes envisaged under this policy over a period of 7 years. Under this policy, the government will establish a national software product mission. This policy has been framed by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. And for more on this, I'm joined by Mr. Ajai Garg, Senior Director, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Mr. Prasanto K. Roy, Senior Director, FDI Consulting, and Mr. Jain, Cyber Expert. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, all of you. Mr. Garg, let me begin the show with you. India's software products industry is estimated at $7 billion. It is growing at 9.5%. Looking at this growth rate, how important is this policy?
You talked about $7 billion of the total revenues of around $180 billion that come from the IT sector. So it comes to around 3 to 5% of the total revenue that comes from the total IT sector, and it's a dismal number. Looking at the talent that we have in India and looking at the massive strides on digitalization that we have made in the last 5 years, these numbers have potential to increase many folds. So the national policy on software products gives it the right traction to take India from services to products, and they become an equitable partners in this IT growth story and keep to the growth, the employment, and the value add that the sector produces in the contribution to Indian economy and employment. So this is basically a reason why we came out with a national policy on software products to give it a right traction. It's not that without this there would have been no software products, but this policy will give fillip and a concentrated effort to make it an accelerated growth in this sector.
We understand that it is prudent to have a comprehensive policy, but also take us through the salient features of National Policy on Software Products 2019.
Prior to giving you the salient features in the software product, let me talk about what do you need for a good software product nation. First of all, we are a strong IT nation. We are strong at services, we are a global leaders in services, and that's a very important reason that we are actually providing more than around 4 million white-collar jobs in this sector, and which in turn gives more than 12 million direct and indirect employment. The second important thing is that we as a country, because of the public digital platforms, have been the first country where the public platforms with an open API systems have been able to create value for businesses, value for this sector's infusion into the social benefits of the common man. And we as a country have been the first, and this is more commendable considering the size of India, which is more than 1.3 billion plus. The third important thing is our large talent pool, which not only we use it for the growth of our IT sector, but that talent pool is providing a huge amount of traction to the global digital players. If you look at the Silicon Valley, it looks like a mini India.
Right.
So we have the right ecosystem in place for the software products to grow. Now, how did the IT sector grow? If we consider Infosec and the TCS of today or the Wipros of today to be multinational giants, let's understand in 80s they were startups.
True.
So the same growth story will happen from the product side, and this is the main aim by which we are taking it, the various salient features. What we intend to do is that we want to ensure that the 25% of the contribution in the software industry comes from the product side, and we want to take it to 70 to 80 billions by 2025. That's the first thing. The second thing that we want to do is that we want to nurture 10,000 technology specific startups around the country through using the emerging tech, through using the huge infrastructure that both the government and the private sector has created under the software technology parks of India, through the various public platforms that have been produced in India. And we want to nurture around 10,000 product specific startups that will contribute in the story. You talked about a 1500 crore fund. That is for a specific purpose. The 1000 crores have been earmarked for creating a venture fund or a fund pool attracting 4,000 crore from the private sector, which will act as a venture fund or a funding mechanism for all these 10,000 startups and other ecosystems that we are talking about. The important part in this is that, and the missing link in India is there is a little contribution on R&D funding by the private sector. Government has also have been earlier reluctant to actually fund private sector in R&D. The 500 crore fund kept under this scheme is specifically to provide R&D funding directly to the startups and companies to take it to infuse more IP into the IT sector. I'll just quickly, then there is a need to actually upgrade our talent pool, and we want to create 1 million IT professionals upskilled for taking the challenges of the product industry. We want to create sector specific clusters, 20 numbers, around software products. And last of all, you talked about the software product mission, national software product. It will comprise not only of the government people, but the industry stalwarts, the academic stalwarts. They together will actually brainstorm and come out with the right set of policies and perspectives that will take the product industry forward.
So those are very imperative salient features that you just enumerated for us. But coming to you, Mr. Rao, this policy also talks about creating a single window clearance platform to deal with legal and regulatory issues. How important is this step to transform this sector?
You know, I think the single window clearance is a great part of it. Let me just step back one step and say that, you know, the software product policy is a great thing, and it's something that the industry associations like NASSCOM and iSpirit and others have been asking for. It's not just because of, you know, let's look at the numbers. I think Ajai encapsulated them well. But just to summarize, you know, out of the $180 billion ITS industry, he said about 130 odd, a little more, billion dollars is actually exports. Out of that, just over 2% is products. So about $2.3 billion is exported software products. So one is, of course, the need to grow this and the potential to grow this, because there is a lot more robustness, inertial robustness in products, and, you know, we really need to grow from that 2%. There's another very important reason, and that is the entire services space, which is about $130 billion of exports, is poised on the edge of multiple inflection points around AI. If you look at the success stories that India has had in enterprise products, it's been in banking, and that has emerged from services. So the productization of those services led to a fair bit of success in banking products. What we are facing now is AI and automation and various other forms, around AI and machine learning, disrupting the services delivery that we have, whether it's in IT or ITES. And that involves a productization. We've got to be there. So it's not just about growing the software products part, but protecting the services space that we have, and not hand over the productization of that to external entities like, you know, vendors which make boxes that do automated call handling and things like that. So that's one very key thing. Coming to your question on the single window part, I think that's one very important step, but I've got to mention here that, you know, we've still got to see how this plays out in terms of what the startup experience. So there is a certain range of things that the startups will still have to do, and I'm not sure if this will be able to address that. Those are all regulatory and compliance issues. That's a very significant barrier right now. For example, startups are struggling with this angel tax issue. So angel funding, some of them have been slapped with 30% tax with up to 300% kind of penalties on that, which is almost killing. So the compliance for that, the legal fees that they're paying to grapple with that. Then the simple things of startup, opening a startup, and we're still shutting down a startup. So it would be very interesting to see how this actually addresses that part of the single window, because I think a lot of the focus is on, engendering the R&D. That is one part of it. The second is clearing the import and export related barriers. That's a very important part. But I'd love to see how these key challenges, which are around the startup ecosystem, opening, shutting companies, regulatory compliance, GST compliance, that one aspect is cleared. The second is market access. And I'm glad to see that, this policy specifically mentions inclusion in GEM, which is the government e-marketplace. That's been a very significant issue, and I really hope to see that being addressed. But market access, for example, the policy talks about smart cities. Problem is there are startups which are doing good work which could be incorporated in smart cities, but they cannot easily access those tenders. And there is a good reason for that. A smart city, for example, when it's bringing in somebody supplying, let's say, parking management services, there's a very innovative product, but they also want to see stability. They want to see a support system which is going to be there for 10 years. So they're worried, if it's a startup, will it be able to do that? So there are ways around that, working with and doing joint bidding with a larger company which qualifies in every way, etc. But that market access thing, it would be great if this policy is able to show a way to tackle that, so that the larger ecosystem of startups outside the clear software products thing also have a path to follow. And the rest of the ecosystem, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs can actually perhaps look at this as a role model if it takes off this way, and extend this to other startup arenas.
Well, absolutely. And we must remember that steps have been taken to provide breather to startups from angel tax. But we'll just talk about startups in a bit. Coming to you, Jain, this policy also talks about creating a vibrant Indian software products industry. How will this policy ensure that it is driven by intellectual property?
You see, for last 15 years, the moment we start talking about software industry, we say India is a software superpower. But we all have to admit that India is not a software superpower. We are a software, largest software outsourcing economy at best. We are not a product-oriented nation. We don't create architecture for the products. We simply do the BPO and outsourcing work. We code something which someone else in the West has designed. So this policy, one, it will put focus on creating the original designs and architecture. It'll ensure that the intellectual property remains in India. And why, I'll tell you that if you talk about creating a startup ecosystem or a software product-based economy, you have to understand that you have to push for the research and R&D in the contemporary technologies like AI and ML. So this policy talks beautifully about creating a startup research and development fund, which has been completely missing in both private sector and government. So if the government starts mentoring startups with providing them R&D fund, and then hand-holding them, giving them the market access, so two things will happen. A, successful startups will not be bought out by bigger companies or the bigger players, especially from the West. They will go on to become the big companies in the world. For example, the Infosec example was cited. Thank God Infosec was not bought out, otherwise they would not have become. So what happened with Mindtree or many other companies? So if you give them money for R&D, if you help them create original innovative products, if you give them market access, you are technically giving them money and opportunity. And somebody put a question about the ability of startups to provide the post services, post installation and stuff. This is a very flawed argument. This is given by mostly all the government departments, which says that we are not sure whether this startup will be able to provide us the support for the next 10 years. And that is why we would want them to bid with the private companies, the bigger companies. Now, if you force them in the initial stages to bid with the bigger sharks, they will never be able to stand up on their own. Count me the number of startups whom you gave money and tender, and they will fail to provide the post deployment services. Not even one or two. So any startup which has got a tender and money, they have done the beautiful job. Rather, it's the bigger companies. For example, the Ambani Group, which was running the Delhi Metro, they ran away with projects. Startups never run away because they have to survive. People who leave their careers, who put their family money, they will do their best and everything to ensure that their product goes on for 10, 15 years. They're putting their lives at stake. The bigger companies, for them, it is only 50 crores, 100 crores money. If the project fails, they simply get out of the market and go away. And third thing, they are talking about creating 10 lakh professionals and 1,000 leaders. That is where I'm worried because these are the similar policies which were talked by the UPA government also, that they wanted to create 5 lakh cyber security professionals. It's been almost 10 years. We have not been able to create even 1,000. So one good thing in this policy is that there is a committee or a mission or a board they are trying to form, which will monitor the entire mission, which will take the corrective steps. So as long as there are milestones set, there are accountabilities set, there are course correction mechanisms, I think it will succeed, it will revolutionize the sector. So if the government, even if it is 500 crores like small money, if they, it is a symbolic message that government is willing to invest money in R&D with startups. They are willing to trust private sector startups for R&D. They are willing to hold your hand. They are willing to give you market access. And that message, if it is implemented in toto on ground, it will, revolutionize the startup sector. We will become one of the biggest startup economies in the world. We'll outcast Israel. I mean, when you create clusters, sector-specific clusters, for example, medical sector clusters, banking sector clusters, if there are 100 startups in the same sector working together, you're trying to create an ecosystem where they can collaborate with each other and create bigger products. So that's where I think the vision in this policy is very clear. If it is implemented, I think I'll give them 100 out of 100, as long as they can implement it on the ground, not on the paper.
We'll talk about the implementation in just a bit, but you raised a very legit point about startups. We'll take that concerns to Mr. Garg. You plan to nurture around 10,000 startups. How do you plan to incubate them?
A very right answer, and one answer to my two earlier speakers is that this policy is not about Startup India or startup promotion.
Certainly.
This policy is about promoting startup products, and startups form a very important integral part of promoting software products. Now, when you talk about 10,000 startups being nurtured around the country, so I'll be happy to announce that we have already put some schemes in place that are actually working towards creating these 10,000 startups. Tomorrow, through a webcast, we are actually launching the Technology Incubation and Development of Entrepreneurs, where academia, research, industry and government will come together to nurture 2,000 software product or high-tech software product startups in the country. The key players will be academia, as I said, researchers, industry, and the government coming together onto a single platform to nurture these 10,000 startups. The scheme is there. The money has been approved. 2,065 crores have been, and that's beside the 1,500 crores. The second is that, let's understand, STPI has 5,56,000 square feet of incubation space in the country. They have more than 3,000 members, all small and large IT companies which are members of STPI, which are ready to mentor, handhold these startups and take them to the next level. The third important thing is that it's not about helping creating 10,000 startups. It's actually answering various issues which either Jiten or my friend has raised, which needs to be solved. A market access is a key issue. We have come up with policies under the GFF that allow startups to come and bid at an equitable platform to the companies. The second important is the procurement arm, which happens to be the government e-marketplace. They are able to actually register themselves startups on the GEM, provide an access to the market, but important is whether they get it or not. We are working closely with GEM to ensure that they get the market and all these issues which are related to proof of concept, they're not adhering to standards and all that address. And the last very small point is that we are creating an accelerated type of thing called the Mighty Startup Hub, which is a conglomerate of all these incubation startup ecosystem, creating and companies, mentors and all that coming onto a single platform run by a professional body, mentored by the stalwarts in the industry to actually handle and address all these issues. If there is an issue of standards in the smart city project, it needs to be addressed at the inception level of the product creation rather than we getting worried at the time of a market access.
So efforts are being made.
I want to make
Yes,
a
Jiten, you
small
wanted to.
differing view with the sir. You see, the moment you think that this policy is not focused on startups, we are creating a historic blunder. I'll tell you why. Why are you? No. I'm just.
What he meant was
I'm just
that
creating a
the focus is just not on
differing
the
view. Why?
startups.
It has to be. I'll tell you why. See, what are you giving in this policy? Mentoring, R&D money, market access. Tell me who doesn't have it. It's a startup who doesn't have it. If you talk about a bigger company like Tech Mahindra, Infosec, Reliance, do you think they don't have money? They don't need your money. They have never taken any money from the government. They don't qualify for your startup fund. They have got market access anyways. They have enough money for R&D. They have global market access. So these companies have every wherewithal if they wanted to invest money in R&D. They don't do it because they don't sense money over there. It is a startup which needs money for R&D. It is a
But
startup
what
which
he
needs
meant
IP.
was that the focus is not
See, whatever
only
you're
on the
trying to
startups, but
provide, the
creating
bigger
economies.
My issue was very limited. My issue was it is the focus of the policies around software products being nurtured through startups.
Yeah.
Huh? One point. But it is not about addressing issues which a larger startup ecosystem in this country needs. We are working with we have been working very closely with DIPT on the startup, whether it's on the angel tax, whether it's around registration, or whether it's around closure of a startup.
Right, sir.
But that's a specific, that is a whole gamut of
they've done a good
activities
job.
that the
They've done a
government
good job.
I have
They've done a
last
good
30
job on
seconds
that,
and I'll give
especially-
last word to Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, the import of software products stands at $10 billion. Clearly, we are a net importer of software products. How will this policy propel exports from India?
Well, I think that's a bit of a long haul, from 2 billion to crossing, 10 billion is where we are, we'll be growing. So there'll be more software products imported at a faster clip. I think that's a fairly long haul. I think it's important to realize, I fully agree with Ajay Garg, the impact or the import of this policy is not focused on startups. I think the worry is that when startups are grappling with other issues in the ecosystem, then those issues are sometimes overwhelming, including angel tax and certain other things which there are attempts to address. I think another key one is the policy stability of the ecosystem. Now, the question of money, I'll link this to the previous point that I made. There is funds, there's a massive amount of funding, and the government obviously has the wherewithal to supply that. And I think, as my fellow panelists said, that not all of these startups are looking to the government for money. In fact, there's a very high interest in attracting VC money, because that brings with it a lot of other things such as mentoring, such as other market access, and so on. So given a choice between government money in the form of debt or even equity and VC or angel money, people would tend to opt for the latter. Now, for that ecosystem, investors are very concerned about things like policy stability issues. There have been 3 or 4 major policy disruptions, around
Absolutely.
data localization.
So it is imperative to have a stable policy. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. So this policy will enable the software sector to leverage opportunities available under Digital India program, leading to inclusive and sustainable growth. That's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Rajya Sabha Television.